Welcome everyone to More Good Days, the official podcast of Haven Headache and Migraine Center. I'm your host, Izac Ross, founder and CEO of Haven. I've lived with chronic migraine since the age of 2. Our podcast is here to help you keep up with the latest research, policy updates, and most importantly, practical advice for managing your life with headache and migraine disorders. This podcast is here to provide you with valuable insights and support on your journey to more good days. Just a quick note before we dive in, we strive to make all the statements in this podcast clinically accurate, but it is not intended as medical advice. Please review with your provider, or if you're in California, make an appointment with one of our headache specialists at havenheadache.com. In our episode, we're going to chat about one of the biggest topics that's undergone major shifts in the last 10 years, and that's the concept of triggers. But before we get started, Netta, how has the last 2 weeks treated you? What have you done with your good days?
Well, a lot of things actually. It's been a wonderful last few weeks. I was in Italy visiting my husband's family, and then we came back just before the 4th of July, and my whole family came over, and we got to see all the San Diego fireworks from here. So it's been a really nice couple of weeks with my good days. How about you?
Well, we actually tried to escape the fireworks because our pup Parker is an absolute just puddle with the fireworks. So we took him and ourselves to Guerneville on the Russian River to escape and had a fun weekend there. And then had a great time with my family and my cousins on a little family vacation in Santa Cruz as well.
Awesome.
Back with you. I'm excited to talk about triggers, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess we should really start with the basis. What are and are not triggers?
It's a great question. So really the concept of triggers in migraine has been a huge topic of debate. There's recent evidence to suggest that some symptoms that were kind of originally thought to be migraine triggers may actually be part of the early phase of a migraine attack, which is actually called the premonitory phase or prodrome. And this premonitory phase is actually the first phase of the migraine attack, and it can occur anywhere from hours or days before the actual headache sets in. So sometimes it's hard to correlate that with the actual headache. But symptoms like sensitivity to light and sound, fatigue, or neck pain, which kind of mimic triggers or we may think are triggers, but are actually just signs of that early phase of a migraine attack.
That's so interesting. I mean, I know this now, but like as a kid, that did not exist as theory. And like foods were thought to be as triggers, which are now sometimes thought to be cravings and,
Exactly.
treating neck pain. But that was just a part of the disorder. Just so interesting to see that evolution in my own care.
But really, regardless of this debate around triggers, there are still triggers for migraine. And, people with migraine tend to list a few major triggers. And these have really been validated and seen across study to study, people kind of listing similar things. And kind of some of the main ones are things like stress letdown, menstrual cycle in women, changes in sleep, like sleeping too much or sleeping too little, certain foods and alcohol. So really kind of around that concept of diet and hydration, changes in weather and in barometric pressure, and lots of exertion or kind of overexerting yourself.
I'd say two of the biggest ones for myself are weather, which kind of sucks because it's not one that's in any of our control. And definitely that change or drop or sudden rise in stress is a big one for me as well. Going on a vacation can sometimes be an unpleasant first day or two.
Yeah, the flights can be rough.
As a clinician, what do you think is in one's control or not? In your experience, does anyone actually cure their headaches by eliminating triggers?
Yeah, it's possible to reduce migraine attacks just from kind of avoidance of certain triggers. But it's important to understand that there's no cure for migraine. So treatment is really about managing migraine attacks and symptoms and decreasing frequency and severity. So yes, this can include a goal to reduce triggers that are in someone's control, but that's not always possible. Like you mentioned, we can't control the weather, and there are many triggers that are just unavoidable. So, you can try to optimize your lifestyle around things like weather, or you can try to optimize the triggers that are avoidable. If you know you're going on a flight, or if you know you're going to be traveling somewhere with different weather, or if you know the weather's just going to be bad around that.
There's also an intersection with sort of lifestyle modifications and triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the overlap there, and what do you see patients progressing in that sense?
I think lifestyle and lifestyle modifications and optimization are one of the key important things that people can actually do to help prevent migraine. So I've actually seen many patients who are able to significantly decrease their migraine attacks by lifestyle modifications alone. And these really focus on stability and routine for the brain, which we know is really important in patients with migraines. For example, aerobic exercise every day has been shown to help prevent migraine attacks. Also, sleeping and waking at the same time every day. So, really not varying in those times, staying well hydrated, eating meals at regular intervals, and making sure to get protein with each meal is actually really important too. So, it's really more about the routine that you set for you and your brain in terms of your lifestyle than anything else.
Food triggers is probably one of the more controversial ones people talk about out there with migraine. What is that really, and how does that relate to the prodrome? What do we know now that's different?
Yeah, so it can still be a challenge to really differentiate between a true food trigger and a prodrome symptom. So take, for example, chocolate. So it's has long been cited as a food trigger. And for many people, they kind of think of it as a food trigger. But research actually suggests that the part of the brain responsible for the prodrome, which is called the hypothalamus, is also responsible for food cravings. And that eating chocolate before a migraine may be just a craving or a symptom of the prodrome and not actually a migraine trigger. Really, kind of the only way to really know if you completely cut out chocolate. But that's not maybe something most people want to do. I don't think I would. But it goes the same way with if you think there is a particular food that is a trigger for you. Really, you want to just eliminate it and see. But I don't think a true elimination diet where you cut everything out and just kind of start with one thing at a time, adding back in, I think that's really hard to do and really stressful to do. So that's not something I generally recommend. What I would recommend in terms of food is really focusing on eating healthy, cutting out processed foods, fried foods, fatty foods, and making sure you get a good amount of.
Number one, as a kid, I wasn't allowed chocolate, which made me want it even more because of migraine. And then it turned out not to be a thing. I was like, yes, okay. But I also found, for me, have been on many of these diets that are so-called migraine diets. And the most helpful thing for me is to just stick to whole foods, that are ingredients
Fresh,
you could pronounce, fresh, shopping on the outside of the grocery store, all the things that are considered good diet. But the kind of migraine specific diets, I haven't found a lot of success with, and they are hard to stick with.
Definitely.
As well. Another big controversial subject. What about caffeine?
Well, I'll start by saying I will never take caffeine away from patients. It's always been an important part of my life. And I know for a lot of people, it's just how they start their day. Studies have mixed results there. Caffeine has been shown both to be helpful and harmful. And it really is truly dependent on the person and how routinely they're drinking it. So for many, if they drink coffee every day, just, they have 1 or 2 cups in the morning, they're probably not going to have any issues. But let's say you skip coffee one of those mornings, that may trigger an attack. So it's good to be routine even with caffeine. And then for others, caffeine can be used occasionally to actually help treat a migraine acutely. So really, I think what's important is consistency. So drinking the same amount of coffee at the same time every day and avoiding caffeine later in the day or excessive amounts of.
Yeah, for me, it's keeping it stable. Same amount every day, same time periods, super important. But I can't function without that first couple of cups of
I
coffee.
totally understand.
I think this is a big one for a lot of folks who experience migraine is hydration. What do we know about that?
I think we probably all don't drink enough water, and that's also what I've learned from my patients is I probably don't drink enough water too, but we know that dehydration can be a trigger for migraine attacks. So drinking plenty of water can help prevent those attacks. And this is especially important like days like today in the summer where it's hot, where you're more prone to sweating and dehydration. And everyone always asks, well, how much should I be drinking? It can vary from person to person, but I think a good goal to think about is drinking at least 8 glasses of water per day, and that's about 2 liters.
Hydration for me plays a huge role, and I know that if I get too dehydrated, it is a known thing for me to get a migraine. I also find that like supplementing a clean electrolyte that doesn't have food coloring or artificial flavors or sugars in it can be really helpful pre and post exercise for me to prevent dehydration.
Yes, those are, I think, very important times too, especially if you're starting to exercise more and doing aerobic exercise, is making sure you're hydrated before, during, and after.
Talking a little bit more about kind of the lifestyle triggers, what role does stress and or changes in stress play for us with migraine?
Yeah, stress, I think, is one of those unavoidable triggers for most people. We all have stress in our lives, and I don't think that's something that anyone's ever going to be able to remove completely. But unfortunately, it can be a big trigger for migraine attacks. So stress reduction methods and coping with stress are really important factors that can decrease migraine attacks. And this can be done in so many different ways, whether you like doing meditation or whether you like exercise or things like cognitive behavioral therapy or biofeedback. There's so many different options that can help in terms of stress reduction. And there's many resources out there. So I think this is one of the things that if you really feel like stress is becoming a huge part of your migraine attacks and a huge trigger, you really need to talk to your healthcare provider about options and resources there.
It plays a role in your life. Consider seeking out a professional therapist. For me, biofeedback and pain psychology have been really helpful aspects of learning to lower my stress. And just to reiterate what you said, I think it's so important to hear that this one is not always controllable. You cannot control the things in your life that are going to cause you stress. You can control your reactions to it, but
Exactly.
It still is going to come up and be a trigger no matter what you do if it's one of your triggers.
It's listed as the most common trigger actually for people. So, this isn't something that we can avoid, but we do have to make sure our patients have the resources to help them modify stress.
This is one that I think is really counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but one that I really experience is the experience of a letdown of stress.
Yes.
And kind of coming into the end of a stressful period can be a huge trigger.
Yes. Yeah. So, for some people, it's not the actual stress of the situation. I feel like during that time, your adrenaline's running and then, there's just so much going on that when that stressful situation ends is actually the trigger for you. So that stress letdown. But I think this, you have to tackle stress letdown in the same way that you would do stress. Stress reduction is really key and focusing on a healthy and routine lifestyle. So to kind of try to reduce those highs and those lows.
How about the intersection exercise and migraine?
Yeah. So this is a big one. And I think for me and what I tell my patients, one of the most important things, and we do know for some people, overexertion can be a migraine trigger. So if you haven't really exercised in your life and you're going to go and try to run a 5K, yeah, that's not going to be good for your migraines. That's probably going to trigger an attack. But what we do know, exercising in moderation, especially aerobic exercise, has been proven to be an effective migraine prevention strategy. So I highly recommend exercise as a treatment for all my patients who are able to exercise. But I would really aim to start with low impact cardio. So things like a stationary bike or swimming. Since for some people, exercise is like running, although, we always think when we think of cardio, we think of running. But that can be really hard on someone who has migraine when they feel like maybe there's too much bouncing, and that's not really ideal. So exercise, I think, is really important, but you have to do it gradually and get to a level where you're doing it on a routine basis every day. And then it really can work so well in as a migraine preventive.
I know I've told this story before, but also getting on the right prevention strategy can help you get onto that exercise pathway. For me, overexertion was a trigger until I was on a CGRP inhibitor. And then, biking became a very big part, or endurance biking was becoming a big part of my life, and skiing. Getting on those pathways really helped to integrate that into my life.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard very similar stories, and it's really nice because people will feel like they've gotten their life back and they're able to, they enjoyed exercising many years prior, but then just couldn't because of migraine attacks, and were able to do more of the high endurance exercise once they kind of got on a good preventive, but found that even just a little bit of exercise was able to also reduce some of their attacks too. So it's great and effective alone and in combination.
So I said this earlier, but the biggest known trigger for myself is changes in weather. How does weather affect folks with migraine and headache disorders?
Yeah, there are many different changes in weather that can act as migraine triggers. And this could be anywhere from things like changes in temperature, or changes in humidity, changes in barometric pressure, and even increased amounts of sun exposure, just being out in the hot sun and the hot weather. And although we cannot change the weather, we can try to make sure all other possible migraine triggers are optimized to try to avoid an attack. And I often tell my patients that triggers can be partial and additive, meaning exposure to one trigger may not be enough to trigger a migraine attack. So modifying the triggers you can be an important step to really avoiding a migraine attack completely.
Yeah, I think that's something that maybe we don't think of traditionally. Is the way I like to think about it is more of like a glass pouring over versus, one thing causing a migraine. It's you're hitting a threshold that your cup is pouring over, which is more likely multiple things are contributing to that migraine attack rather than just that skipped dose of caffeine or just that skipped exercise or whatever that is.
That's exactly how that's exactly how I think about it. So I tell people, like, don't chase those triggers. First of all, that's stressful to do. So just, really think about focusing on and just living your life and having a good routine. And a migraine is going to happen probably regardless of if you tried to stop that trigger or not, but it's less likely if you were able to avoid a trigger.
Yeah, and keeping your schedule, keeping your exercise up will put more room in that glass for you to do other things.
Exactly.
What's an important piece of advice you would give patients about their triggers?
Yeah. I would say live your life and do the things you want to do, even if some triggers may be involved. And, even with that, so you may be exposed to some hot weather, but make sure you stay really well hydrated. Make sure you bring that really large bottle of water with you. And also just keep an acute migraine treatment on hand, because you might need to use it, but you might not. But it's great to have it there in case you need it.
Yeah, one tip I think is just like so important is to make sure you've got your migraine meds stashed in every place that you're possibly going to need them. I've got them in my car. I've got a little thing in my bike bag. I've got one in my backpack. I have one in my keys.
Yes. It's preparation.
Put them in your office, filing cabinet. Like, the worst thing that can happen is just like not having that within reach when you know one is coming on.
Yeah.
So
it'll
stash
reduce
them
stress just by putting them in places where you know you may need them.
That just hoard it in place.
Yeah.
Well, I think this was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Netta. And we'll see you back in 2 weeks. And if you're in California, again, make an appointment with us at havenheadache.com. And hope you have some good days between now and the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.